Welcome to Friday Rugby. I'm Stuart Cameron with you for the next few minutes, and I've got Stuart McFarlane with me today. We're going to be looking back on the Six Nations, Scotland with the wooden spoon, but my goodness, what a final day that was.
It almost rescued the Six Nations. It was a fantastic day, 3 fantastic games. Obviously, 2 teams at home ended up being completely outplayed. But Wales, their performance in the second half really set us up for an extraordinary afternoon and an early evening of rugby with the 2 matches that then followed. Scotland will be, as we speak now, a week or so on, still bitterly disappointed finishing last in the tournament. You can pick away, and many of us have, at individual performances and portions of each of the games and look at positives and many disappointments throughout the campaign as well. And with 6 months almost exactly until the start of the World Cup, it doesn't really leave Vern Cotter an awful lot of time to then prepare for the 4 pre-match World Cup matches before the tournament gets underway. I mean, his thoughts, I think, even before the penultimate game in the competition would be drifting towards the World Cup, and players that will be at his disposal after June, those that will be eligible, because I think after the defeat against Italy and the manner of the defeat against Italy, he came out and said the players are simply just not getting the message, and I think he felt at this stage that it was almost a lost cause, despite the fact it still had 2 games to play. And their performance for 20 minutes against England was extremely positive. But the fact that Ireland, I think, made more line breaks in the game against Scotland than they had in the previous 4 matches tells you that they totally dominated that final match.
Now, there were a few individual good performances. Stuart Hogg, obviously, I would say, is probably the star player in the Six Nations, and the stats certainly reflect that as well. And I mentioned in the Southern Reporter yesterday in my article, when I was kind of putting it all together, dissecting it all and trying to find a few positives, etc. If you take a look at the squad at the moment and then decide which ones would be possibly getting into a Lions squad at the moment, you're only really talking Johnny Gray and Stuart Hogg, and that's just not enough good players.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that those 2 made, I think, the Six Nations Championship Final 12 for player of the tournament. But we've been in this situation for such a long time now. When Lions selection comes round, you're scrambling to list more than a small handful of Scottish players that realistically will be selected either in the initial selection or as backups if there are injuries to players in the initial selection pool.
And that tells its own story, really.
It does, and this is where we feel we're going round in circles in some ways, in terms of taking young players 16 to 19 and then ensuring that they make the grade beyond the age of 19 at the very highest level, just taking them on that final step. It can often be in all sports that hardest step to make, from a promising teenager to somebody who's accomplished and is very much at the top of their game, whatever sport you're in, and that seems to have been a problem right since the very advent of the professional game 20 or so years ago now. So yeah, we kind of are going round in circles in some respects. But what is positive is, if you look at going into the World Cup, you look at Wales, you look at Ireland, you look at Scotland, New Zealand, South Africa, their five nations, how their domestic club setup is structured, how it's focused, is with the good of the international game in mind. I don't necessarily think that's completely true in England and France. I think you look at the Premiership in England, a bit like football, it's not necessarily designed for the optimum performance from these players then playing for England. I mean, how many players are going to turn out for their clubs this weekend? They probably all should be on a weekend off just to recover from the Six Nations, whereas we tend to adopt a rotational system in Scotland, and they do in Wales and Ireland, where you play maybe 3 matches and then have a week off. I think that is absolutely vital. And I think what is vital is the fact that we maximise the rules that are open to us and bring in WP Nell, bring in Strauss, Maitland, you would imagine, will return. You certainly hope there'll be no further casualties. It looks like Gilchrist is very much touch and go whether he's going to make the World Cup. and at least try and test these players out in these four warm-up games. Problem is, you don't want to give too much away in the 6 months between now and the World Cup, the changes you're going to make. You want to have your A game ready and primed for the World Cup. But I think that the Six Nations and the performance of the Six Nations means that Scotland will go into the World Cup with no great expectations.
And of course, this is the opposite to what we had for the Six Nations, which was tremendous expectations. And that's probably why it's so disappointing.
Yes, I think so. And again, even at half-time in Paris, there was there's the organisation, there's a structure, there's a cutting edge to how Scotland are playing. The problem was that it was coming in fits and starts. And again, the frustrating factor, and we touched on this during our reports from Murrayfield on Saturday, was, and Vern Cotter mentioned himself, against Ireland, something as basic as getting good field position, that never seemed to happen for Scotland. As much as they tried, they never seemed to get good solid field position, particularly in the opposition half of the field, and a chance for them to build an attack from well inside the Irish half. They were always running it from the 22, which a lot of teams do, but Scotland always seemed to fall short by the time they get into that final third of the pitch, if they're running it from so deep. So that discipline, penalty count, they're all things that we've read about, we've heard about so often during the Six Nations, but until they are all addressed, and it goes back to what I was saying before about the message is not necessarily getting through, in the words of Vern Cotter, until these aspects of the game are addressed, how much progress can we realistically make?
4 warm-ups, of course, for Scotland, 3 away. That's France, Italy and Ireland, and another game against Italy, which is happening at BT Murrayfield. They're the 4 games before they kick off the World Cup, and of course they start with a tie against Japan. That's happening in Gloucester. Then they move on to Elland Road to play America. Then it's South Africa at Newcastle United Football Ground, and then of course we end with Samoa, which could be the crucial match, of course. That's happening also at Newcastle. So we'll no doubt be returning to Scotland and the subject of the World Cup later on down the line. But let's switch to local matters now with the Booker Border League match. It's between Gala and Hawick. And of course, Gala, along with Hawick and Melrose, are all in the mix with just a couple of games to go. Yeah,
it's a straight shootout now between these 3 sides. And of course, this game, I think, was going to be played at the end of January. That was postponed. I think it possibly was even scheduled for earlier in the season at one stage. But a lot of people have been looking forward to this fixture. Gala go into it, of course, their position in the Premiership playoffs, it's now out of their hands. They'll obviously await the news of how Curry get on against Glasgow Hawks to see if they've got some Premiership playoff matches to play before the end of the season. But what a turnaround for Hawick in terms of everything just beginning to fall into place. Now, they're far, as they've admitted themselves, far from the finished article, but they're firing on a couple of fronts going into the end of the season. They were very close to the playoffs themselves, and they look at a hungry and an organised side. Gala on their day are an very, very entertaining side to watch, but they need, I think, for their own confidence and again for their own progression, to start winning more big games. And they don't come much bigger than this game tomorrow, certainly in the competition, as you say, the Booker Border League, because Gala have been the dominant side in this competition in recent times, and they certainly not want to lose the title, to surrender the title to either Melrose or Hawick.
Now, the irony of it all is there's been a lot of double headers this season. The one game which wasn't a double header was Gala Hawick when Hawick won at Netherdale. Had that been the result, then they would have been playing Peebles, which incidentally is now switched to the 3rd of April, Friday night. That's confirmed as Hawick's final match in the Booker Border League. But they could have actually won the trophy by now, and I think it's 2007 they last won it. So there's so much to play for tomorrow.
And I think they'll find, if they can win the Border League, of course, if they go on and clinch the cup final as well, these are really solid foundations to build for the future. But what is also, I think, important from Hawick's point of view in this little battle between Gala and Hawick at the moment, and I say a little battle, I mean in the context of the recent seasons rather than the history between the two clubs overall, is that Hawick ended a lengthy run of matches where Gala always came out on top with the victory at Netherdale earlier in the season, and I think that was a springboard to further success this season. So they will go into it knowing they have the ability within the team to beat Gala. Gala themselves will look for revenge. So you've got, these little subplots and these subscripts. Sometimes you feel you don't need them, but they just add a little bit extra spice to what is always a mouth-watering contest.
And of course, if Gala do win it, they've got a game against Selkirk at Philip Hoch, which, again, if you're looking for a mouth-watering fixture, and I know Selkirk haven't fired on all cylinders in the Border League. They've obviously lost to Melrose and they've lost to Hawick already this season, and they were 38 points down at half-time, which was an amazing thing. And then they came back, won the second half by about 26-5 or something. But of course, their season has been tremendous so far, and they could go 22 out of 22 if they win at Kelso tomorrow in National 1.
Yeah, with a win against Watsonians earlier in the week at Myerside. Selkirk, right from the outset, I think they targeted a good season in BT National Division 1. And I don't think anybody necessarily at the club imagined just how good it was going to be, as you say, to have gone in excess of 20 matches now unbeaten in the league, straight victories as well, and to have clinched the league some time ago now up in Aberdeen, a fantastic achievement. Now, I suppose they'll look at a contest against the likes of Gala, and it's, if they do field a strong side, it's maybe a little bit of a barometer to see where they are in terms of next season and how they're going to compete against sides in the higher division. And again, these are really good matches to have at the end of the season, because they're not just meaningful for the here and now, but looking ahead to next season, how clubs can build, how clubs may decide to change direction as they look to the future.
The result could go 22 out of 22 for Selkirk. Equally, it could be Kelso targeting the first defeat in the league of Selkirk with home advantage as well. And so finally, just to wrap up tomorrow, it's the final game for Melrose in the Premiership, Melrose against Ayr. Really, what's at stake is where they play next week in the playoffs.
Yes, it could be roles reversed depending on the outcome of this game. Of course, the playoffs has just added an extra layer of intrigue almost to the division. It's not been a straight shootout, and that has certainly been the subject of many pub conversations during the course of the season. Certainly I spent a bit of time in Golden Acre just prior to Gala's most recent visit there, and the feeling was among some of the supporters that they had obviously finished the season at the top of the league. However, they felt that they had a strong enough squad that with the playoffs being introduced, they could go another 2 matches against anyone in the league, and they would be confident enough. They didn't necessarily expect it was their divine right to come out and win those games, but confident enough that they were the best team in the league and would win the playoffs as a consequence of that. So it has left a slightly cluttered set of fixtures towards the end before we move into the series of sevens tournaments. But it's left us with many interesting scenarios and many interesting games to cover with a lot at stake.
We must also mention, of course, that Jed Forest have a huge game at Biggar. That's tomorrow, and Peebles are at home to Stuart's Melville. But that's it for your Rugby Tonight.